Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Each week we focus on those big stories in the news concerning property, and no matter where you're enjoying the show, live or on catch-up, we'd love to get you involved in the show in the comments section below. We'd love to engage with your comments either live or on catch-up, and if you'd like to email us anytime, we have a new email address, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. You can find the show live every week on our new website, propertymatterstv.co.uk, or by searching Property Matters, of course, on YouTube or Facebook. It's also available in podcast form on your favourite podcast apps, which you can see on the screen there now. So let's catch up with our property expert. Good morning to Joe Joshi. Morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Nice, bright, sunny day out there again today. So I was just thinking, just before coming on air, what a difference a week makes. I mean, a week ago, we were all at 40 degrees and couldn't walk outside the door. And then within the same week, we're half the temperature. And, it's quite, but then, that's England for you. And that's what property does for you up and down throughout the year. It has its ups and it has its downs. And that's why we love the subject so much.
Indeed. Let's get straight into it today. And we're going to go back to an old chestnut this week, Joe, talking about conveyancing. Whose fault is it? The UK's archaic conveyancing process could benefit from a major shake-up to help speed up property transactions. This is according to Russell Quirk, who's the founder of Proper PR. Reflecting on the existing relation between estate agents and conveyancers, he believes there should be plenty of room for improvements. Conveyancing, he says, was initiated as a process by Henry VIII, and in his opinion, it hasn't changed much since. Since its inception, conveyancing, which is conveying of a property from one person to another, has stayed largely the same. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated these days, not least things like anti-money laundering are involved, so there's a lot more involved in it now than there used to be. However, what conveyancers have done is just stick to the same old archaic process, he says, adding things on so that they become more cumbersome and more protracted, and still insisting on doing everything consecutively. He also points out that recent research carried out by his company regarding transaction times, which found that typically offer a completion in certain places can take up to 6 months for a transaction to go through, and up from about 4 months pre-COVID. So basically, the process is getting slower and longer, and everyone is to blame because it's not been modernised. What's your view, Joe?
It's interesting subject, Paul. Obviously, a subject that will be quite close to my heart in terms of our business and our businesses that we've been involved in, whether it's through estate agency or whether it's through auction. Conveyancing aspect is the key. It is sort of the pivotal of the business. Without that, the deals that we all try and do just don't shift forward quick enough. And I've always said it's archaic. It's quite ridiculous, really, as to what happens on it. Do you know, Paul? My first view is that the problem with the system is that whilst there's lots of gains and lots of pluses that happen in the property market itself, i.e., for the time when somebody's bought a property to the time when it's actually worth maybe 100, 200, 300,000 pounds more. The growth in that property obviously is a great benefit and a great asset to the persons that own it. But the system, i.e. the conveyancing and the agents and so forth, just are ridiculous because they fight each other for winning the business. And whilst they're fighting each other, the only person that always gains is the seller, because he's obviously looking to pay as little as possible for the sale of his property, which he has actually made a huge gain on. And if you really put it in perspective, what they should really do is consider that it is a valuable asset to sell, and therefore it's important to get the right guys, the right advice, and pay the right money to get the right job done at a quicker pace. The conveyancers tend to obviously work on a volume basis. And so to get the numbers that they need to make things happen, they will take on a huge number of instructions, huge number of conveyancing matters, which then takes so much more time, and it's maybe one or two people in their office that is actually doing that work, and it is slowed through all of the activities that need to actually happen. Agents are equally at fault because at the end of the day, they can and could actually do better. But because they're charging such little money to their sellers, they don't feel that it's their job to assist the matter. What they don't realize is that if they did assist the job, they'd probably get paid quicker. But it's a case of it's not my job, so I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to get paid for it. And I would say that the sellers, the vendors, are equally at fault in making sure that the system stays slow. And that is because they never respond to the things that they need to be responding to in time. Partly because they start the process and then they say to themselves, I'm not quite sure if I'm really going to go through with this, so I'll delay replying to those inquiries or those questions that I've been asked because I'm really not sure. It's almost a bit of a cloak and dagger situation. They're not telling the parties involved, i.e., the agent or perhaps the conveyancer or the solicitor that they've appointed, the true reason of why things are actually slowing down, and that could slow the process down hugely by months sometimes. So let's take, for example, that circumstances in the home are not as rosy as one would like it to be, and maybe two people are finding that they are going separate ways, or something else has happened in their life that is causing a delay or a necessity to sell something. So if they sell something, but they really don't in their heart want to sell something, but they've got to show that they're doing something to make that happen, they are the real cause. That's where the real problem starts, because if the seller isn't actually being truthful in whether they are genuinely serious about doing something or not. And I always think, and I always say that, if they don't have skin in the game, they don't actually commit to something in the first instance, then you have to really, as an agent, ask the question, how serious is my seller? The problem we have is the agents are keen to get the instruction on because it's a numbers game for them. They want as many instructions on as quickly as possible. They want to win it over their competitors. They may do a cheaper price to win it, but actually they've really not asked the correct questions at the point of the instruction to ask the vendor, the seller, what is the real purpose of them actually selling? What are they trying to get under their skin to understand exactly the needs? Mostly agents tend to go in and do their valuation, talk about their services, and basically how quickly are you willing to put this on the market, and can I take the photographs, send the EPC guy, do the floor plans, and get on with it. They actually omit to ask the real reason of why they are. And of course, nobody's going to volunteer that situation. No seller's going to say to an agent, oh, excuse me, sit down, have a cup of coffee, let me tell you my life story, because this is the problem, and you might be able to understand it, because the guy's thinking, well, you know what, I don't care. He's invited me around. He wants to sell. I want this instruction. I've got loads of people that are going to buy it, and that's it. So part of what Russell is saying is true, in the sense that, it is archaic, but it's archaic for too many reasons. And I think that if a agent was to go to an instruction, ask for the details that they should ask as a question, and almost, say to the seller, I need you to send 500 to your solicitor or a solicitor that you wish to appoint, or a conveyancer, because that will get them starting the local search and so forth, and be ready when we are. Now, I always find that that's a good telling time if you ask for someone for money, that they are either in it for the real situation, or they're just going to dance around the scenario. And I often, so when I use that scenario within the auction world, I find that if someone is giving us an instruction, they have to pay a entry fee. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, I've got £1 million property, but I just haven't got 550 quid plus VAT." And one has to ask the question at that point that, how serious are you actually looking to make this happen? Because it's a 6-8 week span, and in that week time, I'm going to have to do all this work and get you ready to be sold. Yet you're not prepared to put anything into this. That is, to me, a real telling story. That if you're a £1 million property and you're struggling with £500 at that point, really the question is, are you serious about what you're doing? Those that are serious, they have no question in their mind whatsoever to say, "Yep, no problem. Give me the bank details, or we'll transfer that in straight because I want to get this thing going." So I think that, it's the old adage, I'm afraid, money talks and, whatever else walks. But the fact is that it is a commitment that you have to try and get from the sellers. That's where the start of this whole process for conveyancing and for actually their motivation of selling property comes. If they are not telling you the truth, then yes, everybody else then becomes the point of blame. It will be the agent that should have done something. It will be the conveyancer that hasn't done something or has not answered the email. And it will be, and it'll be just like a deck of cards that will start there. I think that it really boils down to the seller at that time and their commitment and their truth of actually what it is that they're reason to sell for.
Well, just let's look at the process, shall we? So I'm sure you'll relate to this. Somebody sells a property, they get a lawyer instructed by way of memorandum of sale. Property information questionnaire goes out by the post 3 or 4 days later from the seller's lawyer to the seller. Eventually, that goes back 5 or 6 days later. Then a contract might be issued. Then the buyer's lawyer issues the same standard 56 questions and inquiries they issue on every single purchase, which takes a couple of weeks to be bounced back. In the meantime, nothing else happens in the way of a search, for instance, being initiated because the lawyer decides on the buyer's side that they don't go ahead with the search until there's a mortgage offer, which can't happen until there's a valuation, which will take 3 or 4 weeks for the mortgage forms and the survey to be paid. So what we end up with, says Russell, is a consecutive, archaic, draconian process, which takes a long time. Surely, in this world of digital portals, Joe, we must be able to find a more instant way than this.
Absolutely, and as I said, I'm in agreement with Russell's view on this, and it's been a subject that has been, quite close to my own heart because it stops us doing what we should be doing, and that is getting a transaction through, selling the property that we said we're going to sell, and get people moving. But it is not just about the memorandum of sale that starts. It starts way before that. It starts on the instruction, in my mind. It's the time when I'm sitting, let's say I've come to your property and you've said to me, right, I want to sell my house. I've got to ask you questions. And an agent that's, knowledge, and that's probably part of the other issue. A lot of the agents, the younger agents, are enthusiastic. And I can go there. I was there 40 odd years ago. Your enthusiasm is to get the numbers in, get your targets have got to be met. You've got to get the instructions, you've got to get the valuations, you've got to get the viewings, you've got to get all of that stuff. But all of that, sometimes you can have loads and loads of volumes of it, but actually at the other end of the sausage machine, nothing is coming out because it's all clogged in the system. You've got them on in the front part, you've taken the instructions on, you've got everything going, and now you've handed that to somebody else. That somebody else is the conveyancing system. They then clog the system up because they're just not pushing it forward. So at the other end of the sausage machine, nothing is coming out. Why? Because it's clogged up in the middle. Now, that clogging could be stopped by the agents from day one. And that is when they go into someone's house and ask them, if I came to your property and said to you, for example, okay, the modern world is everything is electronic. But back in the time of warp, my time of starting this, deeds, for example, were held by the bank and the building society in deed vaults. That's how it was. So what you had to do is you had to, first of all, instruct your solicitor or conveyancer the authority for them to apply to your bank and building society copy of those deeds, they can actually build the sale going forward based on the information that was on the deeds. And without the deed sale, knowing that you were the actual owners, they weren't in a position to make a contract and go forward. That was really archaic. I mean, we're talking about proper documents, archaic documents that were sitting in someone's vault somewhere around the country. And then people had even lost those. They were in the wrong place, or they had a wrong door number on it, or a wrong address on it, and it's stuck in the wrong box. And that could take weeks, if not months sometimes, just to find that deed, which is now electronic. So today, fast forward, 40 years, today, most of that information is actually available online or through a system. So the solicitor actually doesn't need to now wait for a deed to turn up. He can actually apply to the land registry and get whatever documents he wants. It's available, information available to everybody. Get the documents downloaded, unless, of course, it hasn't been registered. If the title hasn't been registered and someone has sat on their deeds at home because they've paid the mortgage, or they don't actually have a loan on it, or it's not been held by a bank or building society, that document is sitting in a file at home somewhere, or with someone somewhere. Potentially, it could be sitting with a solicitor in their system because they're safeguarding it and looking after it. And so that's the only time that you might not get the electronic version. But if it's registered title, you can now get most of the documentation from land registry. So that part is now fast forward. So the land registry has become more modernized, which is a good thing. But the system, i.e. the conveying system, hasn't become modernized because we sit there waiting for each other to actually reply to some inquiries, or even just an email to say, can I actually do this? And the reason behind that is that there is so much else in people's heads that is going on, but they're not sharing with it. And I think that if somebody hasn't put in some sort of funds on account to a solicitor, and said, look, here's £500 on account, can you start the process? I think that's a telling story, straight away, that there's something not actually true to form here, and therefore you need to get to the bottom of that. Once you've got to the bottom of that and you realize that there is something going on, you can actually manipulate that, you can maneuver that, you can help that, you can tell your buyer, look, there is going to be a slight delay, or you could talk to the conveyancer. But I put the onus on the vendor of not actually coming clean of what the reason is that they may be going for. But there are ordinary situations when they are just literally selling the house, and then the agent is not educated well enough to say to the seller, by the way, this is the process. This is what I would like you to do for me to help you achieve the goals that you want in the shortest possible time and get you the best possible price. I need you to help me to do this. But unfortunately, the agents are probably not well versed on the conveyancing system. And so subsequently, they just do what they're supposed to do. And that is take it on, put it on the market, take the pictures, and start finding buyers, doing the viewings, and get it. And then it's a bit like the penalty situation. You've actually played the whole game, and then you put the football on the actual penalty spot for someone like the conveyancer to now come and take the penalty. And they keep missing. They keep missing the this and missing that, and you're the one that's actually, getting the burden of it. So, putting the football analogy, you don't play the whole game and then get someone else to come and score the goal, because that's where the problem comes, in my mind.
What do you think about the suggestion that the agent should have the conveyancer as a licensed individual working within the agency itself, so within their employ? Because then they would be surely obligated to be much more in tune with the estate agent and understand their process. They'd also be much closer to the whole thing. They'd be more visible. There'd be opportunities to work together to sell the whole thing under one roof. And obviously the other thing is that it just seems crazy. You've got an estate agent and a conveyancer that ultimately have the same goal, which is to get the house sold and get paid, but there are two separate entities that just seem to be at loggerheads, and they're trying to achieve the same thing. There is some sense in that, isn't there? That if everything was under one roof, everyone was in the same building, it would get done a lot quicker, surely.
Yes, there's eminent sense in the whole process, but there are some other aspects of it in the background that unfortunately do not work well. So let's just run through that process of having it, because I've often thought about having, an in-house conveyancer that would come along and sit there and do all the work for us. Two issues here, maybe more than two, but let's just pick up. The first one is that if I had an in-house conveyancer that is doing the work for myself and my company, then I'm limiting myself to perhaps potentially, and I say potentially in inverted commas, possibly getting a cooperation or winning business from perhaps another solicitor, conveyancer, who may consider instructing me for one of their clients. Now, in the grand scheme, that is probably a long shot. In probably 30, 40 years, there might have been a handful of instructions that might have come from, but the mindset is that we may lose that opportunity of the other conveyancer working with you, because he says your loyalty lies to the person that is working with you. So I've got no reason to be loyal to you, and I don't have any reason to answer your questions, and I don't really feel that we're mates, and you can pick up the phone to me and say, because you've got your own in-house conveyancer. So by doing that, you actually slightly bugger up that relationship, which is a really off the line discussion, but it is that it does happen. And the second part is that even if we ended up dealing with somebody on one side, so let's say we end up dealing with it on the seller side, we cannot deal with the buyer's side, because it will be against the rules that the same person can act for both buyer and seller, unless of course they are established clients of history that they might be okay with each other for the work. But 9 times out of 10, you as a selling solicitor cannot then act for the buying solicitor or the buyer's solicitor. And then you come across someone who's on the other side that you just are not going to be compatible with. They are going to be awkward in asking the questions, and the same situation occurs. We get back in clogging up the system because there are now two personalities who probably just don't think that it's worth them doing it, because they've got better things to do, or they've got a better fee on another transaction which is going to be probably more fruitful for them, where they would rather put the time. So fee becomes a real issue in this. And I go back to both of them, both as solicitors and as agents. Agents undersell themselves all the time, only to beat business from another agent. The winner in that is the seller. They sit there waiting for people. So when you look at these new operations, and throughout my life and journey, I've seen them come and go. When they come and do free this and free that, agents are at fault for themselves. They really do shoot themselves in the foot by saying, I'm going to do this for nothing. There is absolutely no such thing as a free lunch, and you'll see them all falling by the wayside, left, right, and center as time goes on, because it's actually not such a viable deal. They work on the fact that they might get extra added commissions from insurance that they sell, or mortgage products, or other products that they might do, even a kickback from some of the conveyancing solicitors, who absolutely hate giving the kickback, because they're probably getting, I don't know, let's say £1,000, and they're having to give the agent £100 back for giving them the instruction. So that actually doesn't help the business, because they think, oh well, I'm going to get that anyway. He's going to get £100. They just have to sit and wait for it. So there's no clear indication. And equally, for the solicitors and the conveyancers alike, I find that they end up cutting their cost to win the instruction, because they're on a volume cases. So they've got to do a lot of cases in order to be able to give it the proper service that is required, and speedier service that is necessary to do. So I think the system is archaic because we allow it to be archaic, and we keep saying that everything is for free, and I believe that that is not the case, and so we pay for it in time, and the process pays for it in time. So 6 months, 4 months, 3 months of time means that the agent has to fund his business from his own pockets because he's doing it for free. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous. So I've just never been for that, and I've been very clear in anyone that wants to do that. If they want to do something that's for free, then there's lots of people out there still silly enough to give you a free service. Go there, spend your time, and if you don't put a value on your time, because that's what it's about, Paul. If you say to yourself, well, actually, I'm getting it free, but I'm not going to move for 6 months. What they don't understand is in that 6 months, they would lose the opportunity of perhaps buying something that they would have bought, which may have gone up in value. And we'll talk about that a little later on, and you will demonstrate that in how much they lose out in the bigger scheme over small amount of money in the first place. So I think that we're all at fault for making it cheap in order for somebody who has actually had a good windfall and gain to sit there and not tell you the truth, which is normally the same.
Just lost a little bit of the end of that there, Joe, but I think we got the gist of that. It's interesting that Ian Mackenzie for the conveyancers suggests that 60% of memorandums of sale are inaccurate from agents, and he says it's important that agents have as much knowledge as possible about the conveyancing process so that they can take control of the conveyancing chain themselves. So almost the conveyancers absolving themselves of any responsibility to do the process, because it seems that the agent is the person that has to chivvy it along. It does seem extraordinary. Anyway, we must move on, otherwise we'll not get any other stories through today. And I just wanted to talk about the gap between sellers' expectations and buyers' budgets narrowing. So this is basically the fact that finally the market is starting to slow down. The whole cost of living crisis, etc., 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 is starting to cool the market. On average, the UK's prime regional markets continue to grow 1.2% over the second quarter of this year, slightly down from the 2% in the first quarter. This follows 16% of growth since the start of the pandemic in March 2020. For a property worth £1 million in March 2020, that equates to an increase of £160,000, or £319 for a home on £2 million. So what I wanted to really focus on is not necessarily the facts of what's exactly happened with what's happening exactly with the market, but I wanted to focus, Joe, with this on do we as sellers, if it becomes a buyer's market, how do you change your strategy? Do you need to change your strategy when you're selling a property if it's a buyer's market? Because it's clearly been a seller's market for some time now.
Yes, I mean the buyers and sellers market, Paul, is really about the value and who's now going to gain. It's been a seller's market, and over the pandemic, the race for space, and all those other bits that we talked about, millennials, blah blah blah. It's been a seller's market because people have had other things in their mind that they think, right, this is how I need to move, this is how my life's going to change, and there have been life-changing situations and circumstances without a shadow of a doubt in more ways than we can probably even cover and discuss, because everyone's had something that has affected their lives in that period. However, one thing that it was always a focus is where we live and how we live and why we live that way and where do we want to go, etc., etc. And one of those drivers was through the pandemic was race for space, and so house prices, supply and demand, all of those things kicked in. People's way of thinking, the way we work, how we work, where we work, etc. All of those things started to be a reason as to why one wanted to move, perhaps to outer spaces, cleaner air, etc., etc. So that was but then it comes to a point when things like now, where we have other pressing circumstances, war in Ukraine, for example, increasing cost of living, all of the things, higher interest rates coming through, all those things will be the things that will put the brakes on the marketplace a little bit and say, hang on a minute, this has gone a bit too far, and maybe make people think, well, actually, do I really need to move? Shall I just stay put? So, the sellers don't move, the instructions become scarce. And if they are going to be the case, then again, they're holding the value. They're not actually in a reverse gear. They're just saying, we'll just stay put. When it becomes a buyer's market, it's a buyer's market because somebody now is keen to sell of circumstances that perhaps are not related to market trends. It might be a personal circumstance, it might be a circumstance within the family structure that needs to sell. And if they can't sell, they'll get more realistic about what they want to achieve as their price. I call that a price correction. It's then probably a little bit more real. Whereas if they'd run with the crest in the wave of the crest in the first place by saying, look, house prices are going mad. This is the best time for us to get the best value. And as a seller, they were in a position. Now they might be that people are cautious in what they want to do, but they need to sell, and now they'll have to perhaps be a bit more realistic in their value. Some pundits will turn around and say house prices are falling. That is not necessarily the case. The house prices are probably just getting corrected because they went a bit wild at a time when the demand was high and the supply was limited. Now the supply may be a little bit more frequent. I mean, we talked about on our program several times when, there's not enough stock, and there is still not enough stock in certain aspects and certain parts and certain types of properties. But in other areas, that there's more stock available, and the more the stock is available, obviously it becomes more of a buyer's market because the buyer has a better choice. And if they have a better choice, they're going to make accordingly the type of offers that they might think they could get away with, and they'd feel that they're actually getting themselves a bargain because they've actually now got something like, I don't know, let's say 10% less or a few percent less from what they were going to probably pay for it in the first place. It's a feel-good factor, isn't it? I mean, anyone who thinks that they've actually got themselves something a bit cheaper than they thought is always a feel-good factor. And sometimes that is built in. You have to understand that that is also built in. So we know that the buyer is going to probably come in at a lower level. So you end up putting it at slightly a higher level, and they still feel that they've actually got themselves a bargain. But really, you've actually probably hit the real number, what it's actually worth. So it's it's a game of two halves, as they say. But it's a question of how how a buyer thinks they're getting the best benefit, and how a seller thinks that they're getting the best benefit out of it.
Yeah, they surveyed Savills, surveyed agents, 3 and 5, 62% cited a lack of stock as the biggest issue impacting the market, followed by increasing interest rates, 21%, and rising cost of living, 17%. It's definitely showing that the stock is keeping the price high, but the speed of the increases is slowing to 1.2% per month, which is a lot slower than, of course, it was a year ago. And it does seem that sellers are becoming more aligned and more realistic about the fact that actually there's many pressures on the affordability for buyers at the moment, not least, of course, cost of living and whatever the mortgage rate that they're going to have to end up paying. But what was interesting also was Zoopla have also talked this week about prices, and they've said that new research, the total value of the UK homes has now surged to over £10 trillion this year, as strong demand and a lack of supply continues to drive the prices higher. Interestingly, the average household income now, Joe, is £34,100, and some properties are now making more than their owner's salary in a year, as the total value of the homes has increased to £1.3 trillion. By £1.3 trillion. So that's netting the average homeowner £48 per day in capital gains since the start of the pandemic, which is extraordinary, isn't it? The house is actually making more money than the person's earning.
I rest my case, Your Honour. We have constantly said that buying a home or being in the market is the best thing that anyone can do, and the amount of increase per day just goes to show what an investment in a home or investment in a property actually equates to, which is why it drives it to that extraordinary number that you started this with, as what the value and the the increase in home ownership is. If it's in trillions rather than millions or billions. I mean, it's huge in the UK property market that people are benefiting from. That kind of gives me the pivotal of going back to our earlier discussion, that here is a situation where people that own these properties are making substantial gains, yet the process they use to actually get from A to Z is archaic because they are not prepared to put a value on that. Yet the market puts a great value on their home, but they're not prepared to put the value on the services. And equally, the agents don't put a value of the services that they supply to people that have actually getting. It should be a win for all people, really. It's a win-win situation, not a win-lose situation, and that's where this system gets archaic. Sorry, I had to sort of go back to that to relate to the value in what people are gaining as to what they're prepared to pay to have a service, and they'd rather sit there for 6 months and not do anything about it. Actually, in that 6 months, if you look at the numbers that you've just talked about, it's colossal. On a per day basis, 6 months of that's the value you are losing if you're just not prepared to actually engage someone that is going to do a proper job for you. But it is true to say that someone like Zoopla is coming out with the statistics and the analysis to show how important and what value property adds to one's portfolio and one's income, and also perhaps to those that buy into this, especially at retiring ages, as a supplement towards their income. If you look at the increase in the capital, let alone the increase they may get and the return, they've got to look at it seriously, because their own savings, perhaps sitting in a bank or a building society, is earning them next to nothing by comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Zoopla's valuation estimate monitors the rise and fall of prices with data estimating that 9.4 million homes, so 32% of all the homes in the UK, the value of those 9.4 million homes has gone up by more than £50,000 since the beginning of the pandemic. And interestingly, 23% of all the value of all the homes is in London and the South East. So that kind of skews the market, shall we say, in terms of the figures. But 32% of people have made more than 50 grand during the pandemic. So maybe there is a brighter side to the pandemic after all.
Yes, I mean, we've seen what the market's done for everybody in that period, and still doing, despite and in spite of where we are, even with, cost of living and all the other things that are going on. House prices seem to be still sustaining their sort of growth, albeit perhaps lesser than it was, but it's still, in the running for the best return of anyone that is making any kind of investment, be it a home or be it a property that they bought for renting out. Either way, it is still producing the best returns for them.
Last story this week I wanted to chat with you about actually was published a few weeks ago. We've just not really got round to it, but I've always thought it was a good story to talk about, because we've never discussed this topic, and it's about an increasing number of people choosing to sell their homes off market. So not a phrase I'd heard before, so perhaps you might want to just tell us what off market means and why perhaps people would consider doing it.
It's an interesting word, actually. Off market is discussed in our industry a lot. And I'm a firm believer that if something is actually on the market, it really isn't off the market. But the word off market really is on the basis that it is not marketed on any of the portals. One doesn't advertise it anywhere. It is specifically to a handful of clients, so that might be on your database, or are particularly searching for a specific type of property, and especially works in perhaps the higher end, and that's where it's worked more, certainly in places like central London and perhaps other cities throughout the world, where a specific buyer has a desire for a typical type of property, and an agent like myself or someone else, Hamptons in this case, may have been called to a property, but the seller is perhaps not motivated to put it on the market, perhaps doesn't want the whole world to know that they're thinking about selling. It could be a celebrity that is selling. It could be someone famous that might be thinking about selling. They just don't want the whole world to think, and the paparazzi and the media to start to say, look, Joe Joshi's on the move, for argument's sake. It's just, it's not going to happen. So what they tend to do is say, look, we are thinking about selling, but we don't particularly want to be marketing it on any portal. Don't want to see it anywhere in the media. However, if you have a specific client or someone that is interested in that, then it's worth saying to them, let's bring that on board and do it. So that becomes the off-market marketing. And it has happened and does happen, and a lot of questions are required. So a lot of buyers would like to buy off market. The reason why they like to buy off market is they don't want to be amongst a million people bidding for the same property. And the benefit for the seller as an off market is, to be honest with you, the process and the speediness and the lack of intrusion. So if they've got a nice property or a nice investment they want to sell, they don't want the whole world or their uncle to say, let's troops around it, let me go through the numbers, have all the documents here left. They want to have it to a handful of people that may and show that they have the funding and the ability to actually buy. That's the person they want to sell to, and not the tire kickers that might have a hope and a prayer to be able to say, well, if I did this and if I did that, I might have got this funding, or I might got that this borrowing. So off market fundamentally is really a bit of an exclusive. It does happen. I've certainly been instructed on several over the years where people just say, look, we're happy to pay you your fee. Here's the deal, but I just don't want it stuck here, there, and everywhere. The reason I say off market, if it's on the market, it's not off the market, is that the one thing you cannot do is put a zip on people's mouths. And so if I turn around and said to someone, Paul, here's an instruction that you might like, and it might fit your criteria, but I have to tell you that it's off market and you've got to sign this with your blood to say that you're not going to tell anybody. But you might tell your partner, and your partner might innocently tell someone else, or we're buying, Beckham's house, for argument's sake, and before you know it, it's now no longer off market because someone somewhere else is going to say, oh, Cindy down the road and her husband are buying Beckham's house, for argument's sake, and then that off market becomes on market because someone somewhere has let the cat out of the bag. That's how. But the agent could get his collar felt, because the client would say, well, actually, we told you it's off market. But how can you put a zip on someone's mouth? You can get them to do an NDA and all that kind of non-disclosure documents and so forth, that you're not going to do this. But you can't do that with a billion people out there. Someone somewhere is going to let the cat out of the bag and say that's happening. That's what media thrives on. That's what, the newspapers thrive. They pay people to tell them these sort of situations. So, it's a good marketing tool. It works. If somebody doesn't tell everybody else that he's now on the market as opposed to being off the market.
Yeah, during the first 5 months of this year, Joe, Hampton say that a quarter of homes in London changed hands without being openly marketed, which is surprising. It's up from 20% in 2021. Nationally, around 1 in 10 homes sold in the year found a buyer without being publicly marketed. That's the highest since 2015. And with off-market sellers achieving record prices, they report that more vendors have embraced the route. They're saying that with buyers very keen to get hold of stock before it comes to the market, so a lot of these properties, buyers are encouraging the agent to say, look, before you put something on the portals, can you come and ring me and tell me about it, because I might want to buy it before you even have to have the cost of putting it on the portal. So that seems to be another consideration. And also, for the seller's point of view, they've been quite keen to do it this way because they don't want hordes of tire kickers, as you say, during the pandemic, coming through their house with potential infections and everything.
That's right, and the two are there is a method behind this madness, Paul. I totally agree with the idea of off market and specific buyers that are showing interest on it. What I am going to say is that sometimes it being off market doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the best value, because obviously you're limiting yourself as a seller to who that exposure is going to be. Equally, you might say, okay, well, I'll open the exposure, but you might find that actually your best offer is your first offer, and that's from somebody who was prepared to pay for it off market, who now will not pay for it anymore because it's now gone on market. So it's a real fine line as to how that would be dealt with, but it is another method of sale that is certainly available in the marketplace.
Well, Joe, that's pretty much all we've got time for this week. Some interesting
I
topics
think we've
as
got
always.
a question from somebody come in there, hasn't it?
I think a good morning message, actually. Let's just quickly look. Yeah, we've got a good morning, gents,
Okay.
which I would imagine would be Guy. So yes, good morning, and don't forget, of course, we do want you to get involved in the chat at any given time during the show. Tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Please do. We are able to bring them up on the screen and have you in the show with us. So thank you very much indeed to Guy for saying good morning, and Joe, thank you for your wisdom as always in a show this week for us. So thank you very much indeed. That's all we have time for this week. We must come back again next week and discuss more property matters.